Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Beyond Cost. Today's guest, Thomas Stieringer. We are super thrilled. He is manufacturing entrepreneur, software entrepreneur, sales leader, investor, mentor, and a lot of other things. Thomas.
Father.
And father. Awesome that you're here. Thank you for coming to the podcast. And maybe in the beginning, just a general intro from your side, and then we hit it off.
Thank you for the introduction. Happy to be here and to give you some insights about my personal career and how the industry will develop from my standpoint.
Yeah, Thomas, thank you. I mean, looking at your career, I was preparing for the podcast. I had the feeling you had multiple careers, multiple lifetime of careers, but you actually started very much in manufacturing. You were part of an injection molding company. It was a family company that you took over. How was that, like, basically growing up with manufacturing around you?
That was my second step. My first step, unfortunately, was an Nixdorf representative in Eastern Europe, which was that time pretty unique because there was not a real big companies were not really existing in Eastern Europe. And Nixdorf was pretty famous in the German manufacturing industry. So I founded a company in Hungary, tried to sell something, was completely unsuccessful for more than a year. Then the German wall, the Eastern European wall, broke down in 1989, and suddenly all the German companies came over to Eastern Europe, and we sold like hell. So it was very successful. All these German companies, they had this Nixdorf software all around the world, so it was pretty easy. Up to 1993 when ACP came out with R3. And ACP...
Maybe for the audience, Nixdorf, ACP, R3, could you just give
so Nixdorf had a software which was very similar to ACP R3 today. So with a manufacturing part and controlling part, material handling part, and so on. And SAP at that time had just a mainframe software. So most of the companies use the mainframe in the headquarters, but all around the world is Nixdorf software. When SAP launched R3 in 1993, that was pretty unique. And then suddenly all these German companies said, hey, we will not replace the mainframe software by R3. We will first of all install it probably even our newly bought subsidiary in Eastern Europe. So we made the first SAP R3 projects together with a partner. I had to sell the company at that time because we didn't have any SAP know-how. The only way how to train people was at SAP because all the partners, it was pretty new, all the thing. We sold or introduced SAP R3 in several manufacturing companies, and unfortunately ZF was the first company in Eger in Hungary where we introduced the software.
But Thomas, I have a question here, because maybe one step back. So we're talking about 80s where you started this, right?
That was already 1993.
Yeah.
So, and then let's say I left this company, I sold it to a German consulting company in...
Before we go there, you founded that company in the first place. I mean, 1993, most people don't have a personal computer. The internet is not around the corner. And you're out there, you're like, I'm going to do a very specific software tool for the manufacturing industry. How come?
That was more or less also related to my father because he had an injection molding company that time in Austria. And his head of IT left the company and went to Nixdorf. I developed a complete production planning software for our injection molding company in Austria. I didn't know that there was something similar existing already from Nixdorf, but let's say the Nixdorf software was more generic. That I developed at the time was really dedicated to our needs. And so I got first time in contact with injection molding, with cavities, with cycle times, with utilization, with machinery cost, and so on. And that, of course, was also helpful when we introduced, for example, SAP R3 at ZF in Hungary or in many other companies. So I founded this software company in Hungary, but then, let's say, my customers were not just investing in Hungary, they invested in Czechoslovakia, which was that time one country. So we invested in Bratislava, but after Czech Republic was separated, we had to invest in another company in Prague. Later on, we went to Warsaw and to Moscow. So I was in Moscow when the first McDonald's was opened. So that were a long, long queue. So people waited for 5 hours that they could enter the McDonald's. For foreigners, it was much easier, so we could enter within 50 minutes. But that was a quite exciting experience, let's say.
And you coded yourself. I got that right.
So this Nixdorf software we sold, that was of course a ready-to-use software. We just translated it in all the Eastern European languages. We implemented all the regulations, the local regulations, financial regulations, and so on. And I parallel developed with 2 employees the software for our own injection molding company. But then my father got bankrupt in 1996 with his company. I bought one of these subsidiaries in Hungary. That was a very small company with about 45 employees and just one product. That was a TV housing. Probably you remember there was a small TV set with a video cassette in it. That was the only product that time we had. So, and then I started to sell, let's say, or to negotiate and to meet other potential clients. First of all, Philips, but later on even other companies like Sony, Bang & Olufsen, GVC in Berlin, and so on. And we got many of these clients. And after 2-3 years, we also got some contracts with Audi in Győr, indirect, because we developed or we delivered cylinder head covers. These were different plastic components, lacquered for the Audi and unpainted for the Volkswagen Group. And we did many other interior parts for the CD players and so on. But what I learned that time was, so first of all, the products we produced were mainly for such a car radio. It was a front panel consistent of 15 different plastic parts, which were painted, printed, and we also, because it was Hungary and we had low labor costs, we also inserted PCBs, cables, and so on manually. So we used the cheap labor costs, of course, and a lot of negotiations with German buyers based on hourly rates, based on how we can reduce the cost.
And I wonder, because and after that, your career very much was in the tech industry, in the software industry. Is there some things where, from running really a manufacturing physical factory, basically, that you say, oh, these were great learnings, I applied basically to everything afterwards?
Yeah, that's true, because I mean, I made a technical school, so I had some basics, but of course, I never negotiated a plastic part before. And I had a lot of learnings because, especially Philips, they had an extremely good supplier development program. So I did not have discussions only with the purchasing part of Philips. There were people from the quality department, they came over and they learned me a lot of things, you know, how to deal with complaints, how an AD report looks like, how improvements should be done. So they gave me books which I read that time. So there was a lot of learnings, let's say, how effective developments should work. So they had a lot of experience, how they could, let's say, reduce manufacturing costs. And I used all that learnings, yeah, of course.
Yeah, and later on, we will come to that, you went into the procurement space. But it's interesting, in that period, you were actually on the other side. So did that shape your view on procurement, being on the other side and being a seller in the beginning?
Yeah, the funny thing is I didn't have a plan to start in procurement. So when I had this injection molding company in Hungary, we got a lot of inquiries from consumer electronic automotive companies, let's say, making a quote, and that was pretty complicated because you have in each production process scrap, which you have to calculate. If the last production step is going wrong, you have to destroy the entire product because then you cannot use the plastics anymore and so on, and it's painted. We developed a kind of very simple Excel calculation sheet with a database behind, which was that time the only way how to do it. When I sold this injection molding company to a Swedish group called Nolato, and 1 year later I started a software development company. The first idea was to make an, let's say, product costing software based on the experience we made with our Excel calculation software.
So something similar to Z, actually.
Yeah, that was very, very similar. I visited all my previous customers like Philips, like Sony, like GVC and so on. I tried to sell them these kind of calculation software, which we completely redeveloped in a kind of SaaS application. But I got a lot of complaints because SaaS was that time not really common.
What time are we talking about?
2001, 2002.
So right after the bubble.
Yeah, right.
You were
after
like,
the bubble.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
do B2B SaaS.
So we even didn't know at the very early beginning that's called SaaS.
Yeah.
So that's just, let's say, somewhere, and the internet was not really strong. So I got a lot of complaints because of the SaaS security aspect. And of course, in China, for example, many companies didn't have internet that time. So that was another problem. The funny thing was we had one potential client, which was later on our first customer, that was Hans Grohe. So the company producing bathroom equipment.
Yeah.
And they liked the concept of the product cost calculation because in SAP at that time, the only way to send out an IFQ was I send a company, let's say, an email and they send me back the entire price of the product, but they wanted to get a cost breakdown of the product. So we developed a kind of interface that we receive a request from the SAP. We send that to the supplier, and the supplier has to fill out in our platform a complete cost breakdown. And that was so unique, no other company was able to do that. So Hans Grohe did almost every day a demo for us for another potential client. So that was the way how the company was growing. So originally the company was planned to be an product costing software, but it then, let's say, changed to a procurement software, which was, of course, focused on direct procurement, on direct parts, which needs more or less complex calculations behind.
I understand. And you founded the company in Vienna?
I founded the company in Vienna, got introduced to some guys being 10, 15 years younger than I, real good developers. Development was done in PHP, which was very common that time for web application. Even Facebook was developed. The first version of Facebook was developed in PHP. And so that was the way how it was growing.
How, because we have that sometimes it's said, it's a very specific topic. And be it now from a company perspective, I want to know what is the cost, or from a buyer perspective, I want to understand what I'm paying for. How should I say? Sometimes for people who are not in this world, it's not like the most sexiest topic, let's say. How did you motivate people and introduce them to this world? Because for an everyday developer or person on the street that you see, it's very far away from what they normally have touch points with, no?
Most of the developers I got introduced, they were developing just web pages, more or less easy web pages, because 2-3 years later, the interactive web pages with Ajax and so on were starting. That was quite interesting for them, and the first developer I got was later on my, let's say, co-founder. I gave him some shares 10 years later, and we worked together for more than 20 years. But originally, let's say, it was everything very unplanned. Probably that would not be possible today, because everybody is familiar with how a startup is founded, how the first, let's say, year, how the second year should work, and so on. So that time when I founded the company, that was everything quite new. There was more or less no internet existing where I could learn things. That was just coming up. And when I founded the company, I thought I'm the only one with this idea. And I think 2 or 3 years later, there was the first fair in Germany, so-called eProcure. And on that fair, let's say, we booked a small booth and so on, and then suddenly we saw 20 other companies having similar ideas. Not the same, not so much focused on direct procurement, but very similar. And they developed, they made somehow most of the companies made co-developments with their first customer. We always had, and that was something you mentioned before, we always had the advantage compared to other companies that I had this strong manufacturing background, so I knew exactly what companies need and in which direction we should develop.
No, makes sense. And some people might say you're good at sales. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Was sales something that from the very beginning, when it was about Pull for Tool, that you were thinking about, or did it come later as a necessity, or was it just a clean transition out of your manufacturing times where you would sell basically parts?
Yeah, to be honest, even in the manufacturing company, I was not so deeply involved in manufacturing problems and manufacturing processes. So I was more the sales guy, visiting potential clients. And in this industry, for example, in consumer electronic, they brought out every year, there was a new generation of DVD players and so on, TV sets. So if you don't get the contract, you have always a chance the year after for a new contract.
Yeah.
So because every year there was a new release. In automotive, it was a little bit different because lifetime of a product was 8 years, so it was a little bit more difficult. But in consumer electronics, every year you have a new chance.
Yeah.
So I was doing sales without having any sales training. So that was just learning by doing and understanding what people need. In the software company, of course, I also started in sales and marketing. My wife, she was professional marketer, so she was responsible for marketing that time.
Was she your wife or you met her?
I met her in 2000 when I was negotiating the exit of the manufacturing company. So that was a funny thing, on one hand, negotiating with a potential, let's say, buyer in Sweden on site, and on the other hand, putting SMS with my potential wife and telling her, oh, I love you so much, yeah. And probably we can take some holidays pretty soon, yeah. Funny thing. But she was doing the marketing. I was, let's say, responsible, first of all, for creating a product, and then later on, of course, the sales.
Given that you really are a self-learned person on that field, and probably there went into a lot of trial and error, what was the point where you looked at back and you're like, I'm good at this? Or was there a moment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think when we were about 25, 30 employees, we had already 2-3 sales guys. And I started to take external coaches for training. So first of all, we trained people in conflict management and so generic things. But later on, we had also trainers for how a professional sales process should look like. So, and we had a trainer who trained SAP in many areas, countries, and so on different ways. So I learned a lot about how an optimal sales process should look like. But I also learned a lot about value-based selling. So the customer is not just buying a product, or even some customers don't know if they need a product. Yeah? So you go there and you tell them, hey, look, I have here a new idea, and if you buy this software, you have this and these advantages and cost savings potentials and so on. And I had a contact to a university in Austria. Together with this university, we wrote an entire book, how an ROI for an SRM solution could look like. So that was pretty new at that time. So we started somehow value-based selling. I also learned a lot from the best-in-class companies that time. Yeah, and later
who
on.
Were they?
Yeah, so
who was your you would look up to, or they're really good at this?
At the very early beginning, it was SAP, let's say. SAP, IBM, they had very good sales processes. Later on, it was Cooper, that was a high flyer, an American company focused on indirect procurement processes. And we learned a lot about how these companies are doing that. Yeah, and later on, we merged with a US company, which was financed by American private equity. So we were really one very large company, one of the biggest players worldwide.
And Thomas, we'll come to that in a second. But before we move there, so you did a lot of sales training at Pool for Tool. You learned a lot. What was your sales staff before the exit?
We had about 15 people in sales.
Yeah. And now, if a young sales professional will come to you, do you have a one-line sentence or a number one priority or guideline that you say, follow this?
Yeah, the only thing is think how the customer is thinking about you. So not from internal, let's say what kind of features we think we have or you think you have. Think about how the customer is thinking. So why should I sell? Why should I buy anything? Why should I buy from you? Why should I buy now?
Fantastic. No, great. And then you already mentioned it. So Pool for Tool was rather successful, and then another company came into play and they knocked on the door. What happened there?
We had already a subsidiary in the US. We had already a subsidiary in Dubai and in Singapore. But at that time, most of my competitors, they got private equity money. So we also had an offer from private equity. Let's say we should get about 70 million. But on the other hand, need to achieve a growth of about 45% year by year. We should move our headquarters to the US. And I discussed that with my wife, and she said, hey, we just got children. No way to move now to the US. We should stay here, try to find another way. And the other way was a kind of merger with a much bigger American company, which was called at the time SyQuest. We renamed the company in Jagger. 1 year later, we bought an Italian company called Bravo Solution. So the combination of these three companies, let's say, could cover more or less all the procurement processes you have in a large organization. And we were one of the 3 or 4 biggest players worldwide. You know how it's running in private equity. One of the first things they did is for every department, finance and so on, and even for sales and marketing, they hired an external consulting company to improve the company processes and to check, let's say, how good they are and so on. So again, I had the chance to learn a lot from these external advisors.
Before we go there, so this company that then came out of it was Jagger. But what was going through your mind? When was that? So
2016, 17, yeah.
So this is basically 15 years after founding Pool for Tool. So for 15 years, you're the founder, you're the CEO, you're driving this, and it's basically your baby.
That's right.
And how was that process? Was it hard, or were you like, okay, this just makes sense?
Of course.
Were you emotional about it?
It was, of course, very hard, especially for my family, because every year started pretty good, was quite exciting and so on. And when I took vacation at the middle of the year, I recognized, we don't have enough revenue for all the costs we have. So latest from beginning of the year in vacation, I got a little bit, let's say, nervous, which of course my family recognized. And latest in October, November, I got really busy to achieve the numbers we needed. And let's say we were all the time, let's say, we were never making a loss. We were always,
so you bootstrapped,
minus,
no external investment over the whole 15 years?
We had more or less no external investment. We had a small external investor who was running our US department, but I financed everything by my own with the money I got from my previous exits. And that was, of course, a challenge because I and even my family knew if this is not going, I will lose everything I have. And that was, of course, always a huge challenge.
But then you came to the conclusion, you said, okay, this just makes sense. And coming into a new structure, learning again a lot.
I was then at the end the junior partner for this new, very large procurement organization. I learned a lot about sales because the US sales is extremely pushy. For me, it didn't matter so much if we close a deal at the end of March or the beginning of April, but private equity is extremely focused on the quarter by quarter results. And we had, let's see, bi-weekly meetings with the US colleagues, but as closer the end of quarter was coming, as more meetings we had, and at the end of the quarter, in the last 2 weeks, we had every night meetings to discuss every potential deal, what we could do to close it now and not in 2 weeks and so on. So that was pretty hard.
Was it a cultural shock for you, or was it something that you were like, I was thinking like that anyway, but more for your team it was difficult?
Let's say I expected something like that. And it wasn't that kind of shock for me, but yeah, when I had discussions with my sales guys, when it was my company, I had sales guys, they just mentioned, hey, that's not working, your targets are too high, I will not be able to fulfill it, you have to look for another guy. Yeah. But when I was just, let's say, responsible for outside the US, for the business outside the US, it was much easier because I could say to these guys, hey, the Americans gave me that targets, you have to achieve it, otherwise no other way. So that was somehow easier for me. And I think for the team it was a big change, but also the team, from my point of view, learned a lot and was performing much better after the merger than compared to before.
And you already mentioned American sales team normally are way pushier. Do you think that's something that is good and important for the American market, or is it something that we Europeans could look at and learn from globally in our sales activities?
Of course, I have made a lot of failures, and I try to explain the things I have learned to all the founders. I get in touch, especially to this one where I'm a business angel. And in my career, especially when I was young, I hired people. And I thought these people will perform very well. I got somehow, especially in a small team, you get personal relationships to these guys. And if these guys are not really performing well, you try to change the job a little bit so that the job is, let's say, is a better fit to their capabilities, to their advantages, which sometimes work, but mostly it doesn't work. And Americans act a little bit different here. They try to find the best guy for a special job. If this guy is not performing in 3-4 months, they fire this guy and hire another one. So they have more this typical hire fire philosophy, which they are famous for. But let's say I didn't know, let's say, how that's really working.
But you've seen both sides. So
Yeah.
what do you say? What's your verdict?
I've read in a book that this is a typical problem for European companies, because Europeans, they hire someone they know because they trust these people, that they really, let's say, do their best to help the company founder, to help the company to be successful. But at the end, these people are probably not these people with the best know-how for this position. In America, this is much more pushy. They try to hire really very experienced people with a background who did this job already 5 times before. And that's extremely useful and helpful if they have experience, especially for this special problem to have their resolution. They found it already 5 times different solutions at other companies.
So they're way sharper in terms of organizationally thinking about
It's
how
not
to
just-
split activities, jobs, outputs. Just take the guy who's
It's
really best
not-
and let him do what he's best at.
It's not just sharper. The funny thing is, if you're working for M&A, you recognize there are 2 things, always 2 things. One is the figures, and the other one is the time. So it's extremely time saving, because there is a chance that you hire someone who is not extremely experienced and you train this person, that this person get the knowledge and so on, with, let's say, internal capabilities, external coaches and so on. But at the end, it's time intensive. And if you're working for M&A, you don't have time, because the investment period is probably 5 years. Their private equity is selling to another private equity or to strategic investor, whatever. And you always have to keep in mind, hey, what kind of time frame do we have to achieve these targets? And how could we do it in the best case with as less money as possible and as short as possible? It's always the combination of time and money, which if you run it by your own company and you have, let's say, 15 years time, like I had, you're not that much focused on the time. You're more focused just on the money.
Understood. So it's really complete different mindset, return structure.
Yep.
But you eventually exited, so to say, the second part of your journey too, with Jagger. Became very successful. I think the biggest or second biggest enterprise solution in the area of procurement in general. But after that, you decided to switch roles a bit, become a mentor, a business angel. One might say after so many years of leadership, you would be done with mentoring people. But no, you decided to go right into it. What was the motivation after the exit that you were like, I would like to work together with the next generation of founders?
Most of the money I invested in real estate, so I'm living from the money I get from the real estate. But that's very boring, this kind of business. There is not so much change. It's not really something for your brain. And working with startups, on one hand, is very interesting. And on the other hand, I love to work with people. And I love to work with young people, not so much with old ones. And that's something you can do working as a business angel. This is extremely interesting on one hand. On the other hand, I think it really helps company to avoid failures, to save time, to save money, and at the end to be more successful. And having a huge network and having the experience what kind of challenges you have as an entrepreneur in a bootstrap phase or in a Series A phase, or later on being already, let's say, invested with private equity. I think there's a complete different challenges you have. There's also a different methodology how you have to work. And that was always, even for my company, a big challenge. So we had employees, they were extremely good, up to a time when we were 25, 30 people. And then later on, being, let's say, 50 people, there is another structure, there is another internal way of working together and so on. And they were not able to change that. So we had another people. And these people, let's say, were extremely good. Up to the time, we were 120, 130 people and being international. And then again, we had a similar problem that the company has to change, that the way how you work together is changing. We were making a lot of parties and company events at the very early beginning, but that's something you cannot do if you're international, if you are a lot of people. You have to motivate the people in a different way. Mm-hmm. And some young guys, they were able to change their own behavior and their own way of working, but other people couldn't do that. So we lost them somewhere on the way, on the journey. And that was very interesting.
I see. Okay. And now maybe we have some founders watching today, and they would be very much interested of a capable and knowledgeable investor like you. So for them, what is a criteria? How do you look as a founder and you say, this is founder material, I will bet on this one?
To be honest, when I started this business angel way of working, I was very much focused on the idea, the business idea. Over the last 5 years, I learned that the team is even important as the idea. I have seen extremely good ideas and teams, let's say, working very difficult together. And I have seen extremely good performing teams with an idea which was not very new, not very modern, but extremely successful. So you can see it from both sides, but I think the combination of the product and the market on one hand, on the other hand, the team who is, let's say, working on it, that's...
But talking about that team, what makes a great team?
What makes a great team?
For a founder setup, so for early stage, I want to start a company. Like, what are the things where you look at it and you're like, this is a good working team?
I think you have to be, on one hand, extremely focused. You have a business idea, and in this dedicated market, pretty often there are already competitors there with a little bit different business ideas, whatever. But on the journey, you get some, let's say, your customers, your first customers, tell you a lot of things you should be able to deal with, or functionality which is missing and so on. And I think here in this time, it's extremely important that the team is very much focused on one strategy and being in this very narrow market extremely successful before you try to cover a very huge market and being everywhere very light and flat. So that's one of my learnings.
So stay on course. Set the course, stay on course.
Yeah. And then, of course, also how you deal with the money. Being, let's say, the times have changed. Everybody has seen that over the last 2 years. 2 years ago, growth was everything. Now, profitability is much more important than 2 years before. A lot of companies were not able to drive the profit so much so that they could reduce the burn rate a lot. So you have seen what happened with these kind of companies. Good ideas, good people, but if the burn rate is too high, you have problems, and that's something what is also important, to have your costs and to adapt to market changes.
So one of the greatest thing you do as an investor, and I have first-hand experience, is giving feedback. You're very good at it. How do you balance this between being direct but still supportive, or do you say, I don't balance it at all, if you cannot take it, you're the wrong person?
That's a very good point, because when I started that, I was used to tell people how they should do it, and if they're not doing it that way, pushing for it. But being an external consultant or being an advisor or a mentor, whatever, you can tell someone, hey, maybe that's the better way. But if you got not listened or not recognized, then you can repeat it probably 1 time or 2 times, but that's it. and then you have to live with the consequences, both sides. I was pretty often sitting at home and thinking, how much should I push it now? Even with the risk that this person is a little bit upset later on.
Not with Zed, to just be clear. With Zed, he never had that experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you have that with everybody, because at the end, not every founder has the same, let's say, idea, mindset, whatever, than I have. So that's pretty normal. And the question is always the same. Hey, how much should I push here? How much should I just advise? Or are there even other ways how I could teach or, let's say, explain the guys what kind of alternatives they have? Or what kind of consequences could come up. So that's an interesting way of working together. And I enjoyed it. And up to now, it always worked very well.
And talking about working together, 2001, almost no internet. People don't know what SaaS is. There is no definition of it. The data revolution, the cloud revolution, now AI, LLM models. How do you see the future? How do you see all of these new tools, especially let's maybe focus on the AI? Is it just one more tool that we will rather quickly get adapted to? Or do you think this is more fundamental? This will structurally change things?
A very interesting thing, because when I recap, let's say when I founded all of my companies, so it was always the thing that, yes, there was already a very established process existing, a process how companies are working. Even they have, let's say, worked on their processes for the last 30 years. And then was a part of software coming up. And this software, and it doesn't matter if this is, let's say, if you're talking about a manufacturing process, a supply chain process, procurement process, whatever. So the software was just covering one-to-one the process, the manual processes existing before. The funny thing now is, and you had to have, let's say, these companies were more successful having the right technical know-how and being able to combine, let's say, software development skills together with the process skills being necessary in this area. But now I think it's changing a lot because the processes are changing. The way how you do things are completely changing. And you have to have a very creative mindset, to think about how a process could look like in 3 years. And it's much more different what kind of mindset or what kind of know-how you should have today as it was necessary to have 20 years ago.
I see. And now maybe some advice to the companies who buy these solutions. Again, I guess you live the changes in procurement, especially in direct procurement, from, hey, the software looks cool, okay, to now RFQ lists and feature lists and sourcing committees for software projects. So what would be your advice, especially because you have this approach of value-based selling, so you think from their perspective, what should they focus on now when they're very big companies and basically these processes going to change? What should be their view?
If you think about Volkswagen or the very, very large companies, how they buy, I think they are very experienced. They are already having an idea what AI is able to do. They have a lot of data engineers. They have invested billions of euros in their own technology, software companies, and so on. But I think if talking about companies with, let's say, 1 billion of revenue, they have these small teams responsible for processes and tools, but they have probably not really AI specialists. They don't have data specialists. There's always a question about the mindset of the management team, how, let's say, not how young they are, but how willing they are to adapt to potential changes. Everybody knows that changes are always painful for companies, but this is a question of how you structure your own company, how you make them ready for changes. I think the job of a company dealing with AI is not just, let's say, showing the company the potential ROI, but even how processes could look like in the future for things you cannot imagine today. But I'm pretty sure that today it's a huge job to prepare yourself for a supplier negotiation. And I'm 100% sure that the entire category management, how you know it today will be useless pretty soon, because at the end, if you do a preparation for each supplier negotiation indirect, you always redesign your category strategy. I remember 10 years ago, you did a category strategy every 18 to 24 months, and then it was fine. Today, the world is changing so fast, so doing a category strategy every 24 months would not work. Yeah? So there are so many changes in terms of custom, in terms of energy prices, in terms of material prices and so on. So you have to adapt your strategy all the time. That's something you will see from my point of view in much better preparation for a negotiation, considering much more elements, much more data points, most of the things probably done by AI, more or less automatically, so you can consider much more. But at the end, you don't need this long-term strategy. You will reconsider your strategy every month, every second month, and the entire company must be much more agile than before.
I see.
Yeah, so you had long-term plannings in most of the companies for many years, and I think even the top management, the CEO, has to rethink the strategy of his own company every second month. Am I on the right way, or let's say, do we have to adapt it here or there? Do we have to close production sites? Do we have to look for new technologies, suppliers, whatever? I think these changes we will see much more often than in the last 20 years. Yeah.
Thomas, from the manufacturing floor to the future of AI and how corporations need to be more agile, even more so than in the past. Thank you a lot. Incredibly hard to keep up with you, just the span of topics that you cover. And yeah, thank you for being part of this. For the viewers, Thomas is a great advisor and mentor on both sides. Be it you're a startup, you're a corporate, you buy stuff, you sell stuff. I think this conversation really showed Thomas can help you out, definitely. Then last words to you, Thomas.
I wish you all the best. I think even here in Z, we will see a lot of changes due to the changes in the world, with political changes in the US, European changes, and I'm 100% sure that you will do a great job.
Thank you, Thomas. Bye to the audience.